Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's event in the ReadyTalk webinar series. We're happy to have you here. If you've joined us before, and if this is your first event in our series, welcome and thank you for taking some time out of your afternoon to join us. Today's seminar is entitled, Your Webinars Are So 2008. What has changed in 3 years and what hasn't? Today we have Wayne Turmel joining us to share some insight on the topic. Wayne is president of GreatWebMeetings.com, author of many books, which he can tell you about a little bit later in the presentation, and numerous articles on virtual communication. And he's worked with dozens of companies to help them implement great webinars into their marketing and sales mix. My name is Simone Verhulst. I'll be the moderator on the call today. And before we get started, there are just a couple of housekeeping items I want to tell you before we jump in. During today's presentation, all the participants are going to be in a listen-only mode. However, if you guys do have questions, please feel free to chat those into the chat feature located in the lower left-hand portion of your screen. Wayne's going to queue those up. I will queue them up actually, and Wayne will answer them really at any point throughout today's presentation. So if there's something that catches your attention, we'll get that answered right away, hopefully. There will also be some time at the end for Q&A as well if those questions come a little bit later. Also, if you are on Twitter, as the slide seen before, feel free to follow the hashtag, which is just RTWebinar, and there are also the Twitter handles for both ReadyTalk and Wayne. Last reminder here is that today's webinar is being recorded Tuesday, February 28th, and you guys will all receive a link to the recording later on today in the post-event email along with a PDF of the slide deck, so keep that in mind. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Wayne to start today's event.
Well, gosh, thanks. How you doing, Simone? Welcome, everybody. My name is Wayne Turmel. As Simone told you, I'm the president of GreatWebMeetings.com. I've got, oh gosh, almost 20 years of experience as a presentation skills trainer and coach, and the last few years have really been focused on presenting online. Couple of books that are relevant today. One you'll hear more about is 6 Weeks to a Great Webinar, and that's the one that today's content is based on. I was also very honored. The American Society for Training and Development asked me to write 10 Steps to Successful Virtual Presentations for them last year. So if you're looking for other resources, there you go, end of commercial. One of the things that's going to be really helpful to me and to Simone is if you would be kind enough to really answer some questions for us. And so the first thing we're going to ask you is, does your company have a webinar strategy? And we would ask you to please choose the appropriate response. Either yes, we review it annually, we do webinars, is that a strategy? No, but it's in this year's plans, or no, and honestly, we've got no idea where to start. If you would take the time to please vote in that, and I know Simone has already asked you to submit your questions in writing. If we spend our time together properly, it's going to be a whole lot of your questions and not a lot of my babbling. So we're going to give it just another minute to give everybody a chance. And what I'm seeing is actually pretty common. For those of you who are viewing the recording, you don't get to play. That'll teach you to show up. But what we're going to do is I am just going to share the results now. And Simone, this isn't terribly surprising. A little over a third of folks say they're doing webinars, not really sure that that's a strategy, and also sharing the idea that they are planning to do it, and some don't even know where to start. And Jim actually just asked a great question in chat, which is the term webinar passé or current? And I will absolutely answer that actually in the next couple of minutes. So this is really a pretty good place to start. Simone, any thoughts on what you're seeing here?
Like you said, it's not surprising that there are a ton of people that say they do webinars, but they're not really sure if it's a strategy, and I'm excited to kind of learn what you have to say about it, because at ReadyTalk we definitely, obviously we're an audio and web conferencing company, so there's lots of ways that we can approach it, but we've definitely put together a webinar program and review it annually, but we were at the point where, yeah, we do webinars because we're a company that provides that kind of resources, but what are we actually doing with them? So the strategy piece is going to be key, and I'm excited there's a lot of people in that category.
Yeah, what's interesting is about 20% of you are saying that you actually do review your strategy annually, and that is, as we'll hear in just a moment, kind of shockingly rare. So we're going to close the poll and tell you a little bit about how we're planning to spend our time together here. Let me go here. My fingers are getting a little possessed. We're going to talk about how webinars have changed, especially over the last 3 years. We're going to talk about some trends and research in webinars, what's going on out there, how they've really become more than just a lead generation tool. Even low-tech companies are using them. Many people think of webinars as software, high-tech, but actually some very low-tech companies, and I've got kind of a fun example of that. And we're going to talk about why they're too important to be left to the interns. First thing I want to do is say that really webinars are falling into two camps. There's the lead generation awareness type webinar, and then there's webinars as products. Today, we're going to be talking about the lead generation awareness type webinar. Those are generally free. You create those to expand your database, get your brand out there. They're also using it for lots of other purposes, such as channel education, which we'll definitely talk about. And for those of you who are trying to repurpose content, they make great website content, and you can suddenly have video and very high quality things very inexpensively. We're not going to talk too much about webinars as revenue generating products, although that is certainly one way to do it. And a lot of people aren't really sure if they have a webinar strategy. About 20% of you are reviewing it annually. Some of you are just doing them. It's kind of a spray and pray method. And about 20% of the people on this call aren't even doing webinars yet. So if you're worried about webinars, or you're worried whether or not you're doing them right, here's the deal, gang, and I can't say this nearly enough. Just get over it. They are a fact of life. And we're going to talk about how webinars grow, and we're going to address Brad's question in just a moment about whether they're still calling them webinars or something else, because that's actually a very good point. Why are companies doing webinars? Well, the first thing is it's saving marketing dollars. Webinars are very cost effective. If you've ever had to do a breakfast meeting at the local Holiday Inn and paid for 30 chairs and the continental breakfast and all the rest of it, you know that those are not inexpensive. It's a great way to generate leads and expand your database. We know that. It creates website content. Very importantly, for companies that thrive on their intellectual property, consultancies, small companies, it's a fabulous way to establish your expertise. I like to call it brilliance by, brilliance by association. If you think about it, I've been in the business a long time. I've written several books on webinars and all that good stuff. But the fact that ReadyTalk has asked me to present this webinar really is a shot in the arm for the brand. And it's a great way for you to hear about me and me to meet you. And it's a terrific way for companies to create partnerships. And we'll talk about a couple of ways to do that. But webinars are, quite frankly, it's past the stage where we really ought to think about doing them. Let me share some numbers with you. You know, even as much as 2008, almost half of companies did no webinar events at all. But this is now really starting to change, and many companies are doing it as part of their mix. It's just part of the mix. They don't even think about it. And many companies, it's actually become the major part of their mix. I have a client who started out doing software demos, basically one a month just to see what would happen. It now generates over 60% of their new leads. It's their main marketing effort. And interestingly, until I worked with them about a year ago, they had never sought outside help. They'd never had anybody look at it. And in fact, they didn't even have a standard for doing it. They had 3 people doing webinars. All 3 of them were building their own templates, doing their own demos, and showing different features. So there was no consistency. But it makes sense because, quite frankly, it just kind of happened. It got away from them. And as you can see, there are a lot of companies that are doing webinars at the very least once or twice a month, and it's just part of what they're doing. Now, let's talk about the term webinar for just a moment, because I think that that's, it's an important question. When we say webinar, what are we talking about? First of all, as near as I can tell, and I've actually done the research on this, Brad, the webinar, the first mention of the word came up in about 1998, and it was primarily a chat discussion. It wasn't anywhere near as robust as what we see now when we think about them. And it's a combination, obviously, of the words web and seminar. So it was primarily aimed at teaching or learning examples. The word has kind of gotten away, and there's a couple of ways to, some people call them webcasts, some people call them webinars. I think webinar has become the generic term. Webcast, to me at least, implies more of a one-way communication, less interactive. So if something is recorded or you're not expecting any kind of interaction, that might be a webcast. The term webinar is kind of one that people are familiar with, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot. If anybody can come up with a better one, have at it. But they fall into a couple of ways that companies are using them specifically for marketing. One is the traditional marketing webinar, come learn all about us. We've all been invited to those. As a matter of fact, some of us are on one right now as we speak. But it's the traditional marketing webinar. It's what we've been used to the last 3, 4, 5 years. More and more people are changing to establishing their expertise, and so the focus is less on them and more about come learn about the industry. And people are positioning their company, for example, as a resource to their customers to learn about a lot of topics, not just specifically about their content. A lot of companies are using them for training and building long-term relationships, and I'm going to share that example with you in just a moment. And of course, the fact is that these meetings are recordable, and that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do, not only in terms of website content, but ways that you can help your audience, your channel partners. You can generate new leads and lots of other things. So, when we say webinar, that's really a number of the ways that they are being used. And of course, I hope we get lots and lots of questions about this. Liz just said in the chat that they use webinar in a very active way, for meetings and collaboration. See, if it's a collaborative intact group, I often call that a web meeting. I think that that's a little more descriptive of what it is. But just the fact that you call it webinars, I think, Liz, that leads to the point that it's kind of got a generic term to it. So I try to specify workshop is different than a webinar, a virtual meeting or a web meeting is different than a webcast, but it's a lot of potato. As we said, for the last 3, 4 years, we've kind of been used to these traditional marketing webinars, come learn all about us. But something has changed in the last few years, and it's really important. And this gets to those of you who don't stop periodically and take a look at your company's webinar strategy. First of all, there's just more competition. You saw the numbers. 60% of companies are now actively using webinars as at least some piece of their marketing outreach. There's more focus on education and less focus on look at us. And we're going to talk about why that is. One of the things that has changed, and I think for the better, and certainly when I work with my clients, I make sure that they understand this, there's less of a race to get as many people as possible on the webcast. Fewer attendees, but way better sales cycles. And by that I mean you're less concerned about how many people log on and making sure that you're getting the right people and that you're driving people through your sales cycle. So having 100 people on your webinar is nice, but if only 3 of them are really qualified buyers, are you really getting the return on your marketing investment? And the other reason that technology has changed, and I'm very happy to be with ReadyTalk today, technology has just gotten so much easier. Those of us who remember a couple of years back where you got on a webinar and there was a 50-50 chance of it crashing or something going horribly wrong or somebody not being able to connect. And oh, by the way, as Debbie just said in the chat, it's gotten way cheaper as well, is important. Although, Debbie, I want you to remember that cheaper is not free. And we'll talk about the difference between cheap and free as we go as well. And by the way, I'm delighted that folks are chiming in the chat. By all means, please get your questions in there, comments. I really love for this to be interactive, be more of a seminar than, in fact, just me blathering on. William's got a question in there, and as a matter of fact, we will address that later specifically, William, because it's going to take some time. Let's talk about the different formats that folks have been using. And you may have sat in on some of these, but they are now so much different than they were. It used to be it was pretty much a straight demo. Come see our software. Hi, welcome everybody. Let me show you what it does. Fire it up, share your desktop, and off you go. But there are some really cool things going on with formatting and approach that make them much, much easier to do. One is that a lot of companies are offering an ongoing education series. Obviously, ReadyTalk does this, right? They bring in guest speakers on a variety of topics and use that to continually draw people back. It's not just, oh, I've been on the ReadyTalk webinar, so I know about it. In fact, I'm going to learn something about using the tool. I'm going to learn something about marketing. Maybe the next week learn something about training. That's a really, really common approach. So that idea of a series so that people are coming back, and from a marketing standpoint, you're having that ongoing conversation, you're establishing a relationship with your customers, and it's not just a transaction. One of the things that's a lot of fun is the idea of doing it as a radio show, perhaps. A lot of companies are setting themselves up as the host and then inviting guests. And of course, if you're looking to expand your database, that's a great way to do it because your guests, for example, have their own people that they market to, and you're now expanding your reach out to them. You also, I have a podcast called The Cranky Middle Manager Show. People might not be interested in the title. They might not be interested in me, but if they find out that somebody like a Marshall Goldsmith is going to be on, they're going to tune in to hear the guest, but I get some of that reflected glory. A lot of people now are going to a pre-recorded webinar, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the other thing that's happening, and we're not taking advantage of it today, but as video and webcam becomes more common and easier, it's so much easier to establish a human relationship and put a face to a name. We're not using webcams today for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is this is the face that that I'm working with, and video is a mixed blessing at best. What's important to remember, though, when you're doing these webinars is that there's an end result here, and that end result is to drive sales. That's what it's about. At the end of the day, yes, you want to get your name out there. Yes, you want your brand, but why do you want to do that? To drive sales. So, as you're thinking about your webinar strategy, you need to think what's the best way to grow that. And I saw some fascinating research from a competitor to ReadyTalk, which will remain nameless, but they were asking why people are in fact doing webinars. What is their motivation? And if you take a look at this, let me grab my pointer here. The number one reason that people are doing webinars now is to educate their prospects or their customers. It comes from that whole concept of providing value to your customers beyond the transaction. You want to be seen as somebody that they can relate to. You want to be a website that they come back to when they need information, not just when they're ready to buy. And so the idea of becoming an educator for their prospects or their customers is really top of mind. The second stated purpose, obviously, is to generate new leads. But there are some other reasons as well. Position company in the marketplace. So who are you? What do you stand for? For example, you know, there are a lot of people out there that coach companies on how to do their webinars. I have a book. I have a process. Also, frankly, I have me. If you're going to hire a coach, you want somebody that you're going to be comfortable working with. Webinars give you a chance to see what's this Wayne guy all about. There are people who think I might be a little irreverent or I might not be perhaps as serious and academic as they like. That's great. But there are other people who say, hey, seems like a good guy. He's somebody I'd like to work with. That's what I'm positioning myself as in the marketplace, somebody that's easy to work with, somebody who can help you work with your technology. It's a very conscious decision. Moving leads to sales is really important. People's sales cycles are changing. So one of the things that's happening, and let me tell you if that's why you're here, you're coasting around, you're looking for a provider for a web platform, and so you've been to ReadyTalk's site, and you've checked them out, and you say, hey, this is kind of interesting. Now there is a live event where you can get your questions answered, you can see it in action. You're actually moving through the sales cycle. So the leads are happening not on the webinar so much as before then. You've selected to be on here. My guess is from a sales cycle, you're probably further along in that sales cycle than somebody used to be when they came on because you've already done your research about the company. You know who they are. Now you want specific answers or you want to see them in action. That idea of the changing sales cycle is really, really important. And of course, the more you know, as our fabulous chairperson just said, using the polling questions, finding out who your audience is allows you to tailor your presentation and help move things along. Obviously, you want to add names to the opt-in list. And the idea of creating recordings. If you are not using the recording feature, and it doesn't mean that you have to post them to your website, but if you're not using them for internal training, if you're not using them as a way of constantly improving and doing quality control, you're really missing out on a great, great set of features. So who's using webinars? Well, that's actually changed over the last few years. Software and tech, not surprisingly, come see our software demo, is still probably the most common use of these, but it's really, really changing quickly. The fastest growing segment is professional services. Lawyers, accountants, coaches, people with specific expertise in specific industries, because what separates you from the competition if you're in that business? Anybody can fill out a tax form. Anybody can pull down a law book and say that they are the expert in HR law. But to have the opportunity to get your story out there, to demonstrate your knowledge, to be seen as somebody that somebody trusts and wants to work with, people are rapidly discovering that, and most of my clients are small companies, consultancies, maybe niche in a specific industry, who are looking to be seen as bigger players and more credible than a company of that size used to be. And the digital world allows you to expand your brand in amazing ways. Another fast-growing group is associations. If you are an industry association, not to put it cynically, but you basically have two reasons to exist. One is to attract new members. So if I'm the National Association of Alpaca Farmers, I want members who are alpaca farmers. But the second reason that I exist is once they've joined the association, you need to provide value to your members in the forms of professional education, industry knowledge, helping them get better so that they're seeing value in renewing and maintaining their membership. So associations are really taking a lot of advantage of these types of tools. Financial services. Again, if I am a financial planner, if I'm a tax expert, if I'm somebody who's an expert in retirement planning, you're looking for that help. How else are you going to find that person? It used to be it was all referral, word of mouth. It was regional. It was local. Now, with the advent of online technology, collaboration tools, you can expand your business geographically, and people who've never heard of you get a chance to know how smart you are. And then just flat out education is using these more and more. So I just want to do a quick check-in, Simone. Do you want to take a question or two now, or do you want me to keep moving here and give you this example of a low-tech company that's using webinars?
Sure. We definitely did have a question here from, I'm sorry if I say your name wrong. It's either Desiree or Desire, so hopefully I got that wrong or right. But she asked, kind of going back to using these webinars on the marketing side as for lead generation, how do you know that you're maybe targeting the best audience, or how do you find that best audience? And I kind of gave just a abbreviated answer from the marketing standpoint. I manage our webinar series at ReadyTalk, and there's a number of ways to do that, whether it's make sure you're segmenting your list that's currently in your database, finding the right industry forums that you might be able to insert comments into, like LinkedIn groups, or posting blogs to the correct daily blog feeds that are that tie into that audience. But what other suggestions might you have?
Well, when we're talking about how do you find the right audience, it really starts with the internal discussions, and I'm amazed how many companies don't have them. I mean, have you sat down with your internal people, your director of sales, your CEO, whoever, and said, who do we really need to get to? Who's our buyer? What is it we want from them? It's amazing how many webinars are heavy on content but have no call to action. There's no pull-through. There's nothing to pull people through the sales cycle. They participate, they learn from you, and they go away. You need to really be targeted on who is it we want, and then once you've identified who's your buyer, what pressing business issue do they have that you can solve for them? And make it about them, not about you. So who's your buyer? What do they want? Why would they come to you? And then position your webinar in such a way that they can almost not show up. Those questions, really asking very specifically, what is it, who we're trying to reach, what do we want them to do once they've seen our webinar, will answer a lot of those questions. And then that'll tell you, do we have enough of a base in-house in our existing marketing? Do we need to reach out? Do we need to partner with somebody else, maybe an association? But ask yourself those tough questions, and in 6 weeks to a great webinar, there's a whole series of those questions right at the beginning. And I'm going to kind of move on, but we'll come back and answer a bunch of these questions later, Desiree. All right. This is my office mate, Byron, who is in another room at the moment. Byron shares my office. I'm a big bird geek. And I was at a meeting of fellow bird geeks not too long ago, and somebody from a bird seed company was there, and they mentioned their webinars. And I stopped for a moment, and I went up to talk to her afterwards because I said, you can't demo bird seed. What do you do? I mean, if it was software or something, I could understand. Why do you do webinars? And it was really interesting. While they do webinars occasionally for folks like me who are sitting at home with a bird that they love, but one of the things that they were finding is that they're using them for channel education. What do we mean channel education? Well, KT Birdseed sits up in Wisconsin, and they sell through pet stores. And the kids who work at pet stores are pretty much this kid. Nice enough kid, working for minimum wage, doesn't know a whole lot. And the bird seed industry is actually really competitive, and it's a really small market. So they're using it for channel education. What they've done is they've created a series of webinars on bird care, how to choose the right bird seed, bird nutrition, all that good stuff. They created this content, and they went to all the pet stores that are their clients and said, if we gave this webinar for free and offered to train your people for free, would that be of interest to you? Well, you know, what part of free managed to escape the brains at Petco? So they actually allowed their people to participate in these free webinars. Not only did people feel they got better service from these kids because they had more of an understanding of the industry, but KT's share in the stores where people watched the webinars went up. So while they weren't doing webinars based at everybody, they weren't doing webinars based on the consumer, they chose a very specific audience. In this case, the people who were essentially repping their product to the rest of the world, helped them get smarter, gave them the help, increased the loyalty of people to their brand, and, by the way, recorded these webinars and put it up on their site as well. So they got double the bang for the buck. But this idea of channel education, of finding people who can help support your brand beyond just selling to the end users, is something that a lot of companies are putting together. So what do companies like about webinars? Well, obviously they're inexpensive. Now, to the point that Debbie made earlier, inexpensive does not mean free. They are not free to put on. To do properly, they are a lot of work. I mean, that's why the book 6 Weeks to a Great Webinar is 6 weeks, because it's a project plan. It needs to be treated like any other marketing project, and too many companies don't look at all the moving parts and treat it as a project. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they expand your geographic reach. Suddenly, anybody can be a national player. It levels the playing field. If somebody comes across your company, you have as much credibility as anybody else. It's up to you to deliver on that. If you don't do a good job, if you don't put on a good webinar, you've lost that opportunity. But it gives very small players a chance to level the playing field. It creates lots of partnering opportunities. One of the things that I've discovered for great web meetings, for example, is that I don't hold my own webinars very often because I get a chance to partner with people like ReadyTalk or associations. I just did a webinar for the National Speakers Association, and it gives me a chance to get my message out there, to market, to answer questions, to meet new potential customers. And I create a partnership with those people who have much broader databases and ways of contacting people that I do. And, of course, you can repurpose it in multiple ways, cut it up into short snippets, turn it into subscription material. There's a lot of things that you can do. So companies like them. Honestly, though, and I'd love to hear your questions about this, here's what they don't like. And that is that they're a lot of work. They don't like working with technology because, quite frankly, people in general don't like working with technology. The presenters aren't comfortable. And it's funny, about a quarter of my business is coaching companies on their webinars and webinar strategy and getting them up and running. But over 3/4 of great web meetings is really training people in presentation skills. Presenting online is a different animal. It's not better or worse, it's just different. And here's a shocking number. Over 80% of people who present online never get any coaching or training before they're expected to present to innocent victims. It's a little bit like learning to drive by taking your parents to the airport. You know, it's doable, but it's not a lot of fun, and nobody's going to be in a hurry to do it again. And even people who are good presenters live often struggle online because it's different. If you don't plan for those, if you don't plan for it, if you don't practice, if you don't prepare yourself properly, it can be kind of an unpleasant, unsettling experience at first. And companies don't like it because, well, we tried it and we didn't get the results we wanted. Well, Webinars are like anything else in the marketing world. There's a lot of try it, adjust, try it, adjust. There's also a lot of best practices now that are happening. And honestly, you can avoid a lot of the rookie mistakes. That's what I do. That's what a lot of people do. But the fact is there are best practices now. So if you can work with somebody who can help you avoid the rookie mistakes, why wouldn't you do that? But a lot of companies just basically say, nope, we're going to do it. We're going to grab the intern here, make it happen. And that's among some of the biggest mistakes that companies make. They cast too wide a net. They try to be everything to everybody, and we know in marketing, niche is where it's at. So if it's for everybody, it's really for nobody. One of the biggest mistakes people make is making it about them, not about their customers. Nobody wants to see your software demo. Nobody's sitting there going, boy, I hope they put out version 2.3 so I can sit through a demo. We'll talk about making it not about you maybe during questions. Handing it off to the interns is one of the biggest challenges. And I'm not saying that to be mean to interns. I love interns, and they're put in a bad position. Let me give you a perfect example. I was working with a client, and I heard the scariest thing I ever heard, which is our CEO will be the speaker. Now, the intern was in charge of managing the project. In our project plan, for example, we call for the slides to be done a minimum 2 weeks before the event so that you can rehearse and you can practice and adjust. Well, the CEO basically said, I've given this presentation 100 times. I don't have time. I'll get them to you when I get them to you. Well, the poor intern has no clout. She had no ability to actually say to the CEO, no, monkey boy, if we're doing this, we're doing it right. Get me the darn slides. So when I say don't hand it off to the interns, what I mean is give it the proper value. Give it what it requires. Another mistake, no clear call to action and poor preparation. Just because you can set one of these things up on the spur of the moment doesn't mean it will be effective that way. And somebody actually mentioned this, you can do all the work and market the heck out of it, but if it's a poor presentation, if the speaker isn't prepared, if the speaker isn't comfortable presenting in an online environment, if there's no interaction or inappropriate audience analysis, turns out you've got the wrong people there, all your hard work in marketing and preparing it comes to naught. So those are the most common mistakes, and in questions I would love to drill down into that about as deeply as anybody wants to go. Just a couple of things before we get to your questions. So what's the difference between webinars 2008 and what we're seeing today? Well, how you position it can mean a 300% increase in both attendance and converted leads. And I'll give you an example. One of my clients was is a really, really good consultancy in the area of human performance. They just weren't getting people on their webinars. And their webinars were basically, come see how our human performance methodology can change your company. Wasn't getting anywhere. All we did was change the title to, are your people doing the best they can? How do you know? And then about 3 lines down was, come see this company's webinar. But it was about making it about the customer. Customer doesn't care about company XYZ. Customer cares about, gosh, how do I know that my people are doing their best? Repeats increase leads. So you need to market it often. You can do the same webinar over and over and over again. It doesn't need to be a new show every time. Although if you do that, turning it into a series increases your brand awareness and conversion. And lead tracking and follow-up are the key. I am stunned. Most companies do a pretty good job of tracking the leads as they come in, where'd they come from, who heard about it, did it come from LinkedIn, did it come from our database. I am shocked at how bad the salespeople are at following up. I am just amazed at how little follow-up is actually done after the event, and that's when the sales get made. So the thinking has changed. You know, it was originally 2008, we're going to generate new leads, we're going to get people in the pipeline. Now, yes, we want to do that, but we want to create loyalty, we want to convert those leads, and we want to keep those people coming back. So what does that mean for the likes of you and me as we think about our webinar strategy? And for those of you who haven't examined your webinar strategy in a while, here's the core questions. Are you observing a few webinars and making notes? Are you seeing what other people are doing that you think you can pay homage to, because plagiarism is such an ugly word? But are you observing? And if your company does webinars, are you actually sitting in on them and seeing what's going on? I have a client, in very little time, we quickly discovered that they had 3 different presenters essentially showing different features in their webinars. There was no consistency of messaging. Very easy thing to fix, but not if you don't stop and take a look at it. Talk to all your stakeholders, not just marketing, but the CEO, sales, your tech support. Are you really giving your customers what they need? It needs to be a part of your marketing strategy, not an afterthought. These are too important to just be thrown out there. And what that means is it needs to be treated like the project it is. It needs resources. It needs time. It needs budget. And you need to treat it as important. Now, before we get to Q&A, let me just ask one more quick question, which is, based on what we talked about, have you come up with at least 2 ideas that you can take back to your company? Have we said something that made you think about it today? You know, absolutely, probably, you need to think about it a bit. No, we're in pretty good shape, which, by the way, is fine. One of the things about doing these is you get to see what you're doing right as well as what you're doing wrong. Or you're still as confused as you were when you came here. So if you would just take a couple of seconds, please, by all means, folks, if you want to, please get your questions in queue. We've got plenty of time for those. And we're going to actually, I'm going to close the poll and skip to the results just to show this. So a lot of folks are finding value in what we did today, Simone, and I'm really, really glad. Nobody's copying to being as confused as when they came in, and that's a beautiful thing. Let me do this. Let's get to the questions. If you were interested by what you saw today, if you found value in it, or if you're just interested in looking at a project plan, 6 Weeks to a Great Webinar is available on Amazon. It's also available as an ebook, as a PDF, which is great because you can print off the forms and checklists. If you drop me an email, I'll just invoice you by PayPal, and you'll save almost 50% off the hardcover price. And I'll also include the visuals from this webcast. So Simone, what questions do we have in queue? Let's get going here.
Yeah, definitely. We have one from Ann, and she says, is there any data about how long a webinar should last? You know, we've got 1 hour, we've got 1.5 hours, probably not any longer than that, just from speaking experiences. What I've done in a webinar series, is there a short end? What can you say to that about?
Yeah, there actually is some data around this. Marketing webinars, which is what we're talking about, people are looking in the half-hour to 1 hour range. And by an hour, what we mean is you know you're going to start a couple of minutes late, and as it gets to the top of the hour, people are already skipping out to make their next meeting. So you're really looking at 35 minutes or so of content, followed by a good, robust Q&A. And I would say that that is the most common number. As you get to training and some other things, it starts to, if it's a paid webinar, people will give you a little more time. If it's training and it's really interactive, they'll give you more. But if you expect people to sit there for more than 90 minutes without a break, you're really asking a lot.
So Jennifer actually just submitted one here really quick. How can you get the attendees to ask questions? Which is a great example right now.
Well, it's really interesting. A lot of people hold their webinars. I mean, let me ask you this. If I gathered everybody in a room and I said, I'm going to talk for the next 45 minutes. I want you to hold all your questions till the end. I don't want you to talk to me. I don't want you to talk to each other. And I'm going to look at the screen, and I'll talk to you in 45 minutes. Would you put up with that? And the answer is no, of course not. Well, there's a couple of things that we've done in this webinar that were really specific. One was we told you how to submit your questions and showed you to do it. We actually used the chat. We told you how to do it, and we told you that we'd be taking questions throughout. And then the first thing we did was the first time I paused to catch a break, we actually took a question. That sends a message to your audience. Oh, they were serious. And if you'll notice, once we answered that first question, the floodgates pretty much opened, and it's been a steady stream ever since. So it's not enough to say we'll take your questions. You need to actually model it. And the earlier on you do that, the earlier on people start to engage. The other thing is we did the polling question right off the top. So that you weren't allowed to be passive, we got you engaged physically early on. We engaged you again at the end, so you're physically connected. Now some people, if I look at the numbers, about 20% of you are probably multitasking or just can't be bothered participating, which is fine. But those numbers are higher. The numbers of participations are higher when you set the expectation, hold people accountable, and actually show them how to do it. I'm amazed how many people just say, send us a chat message, and people don't. There are a lot of people who just don't know how to do that.
So hopefully that helped answer that question a little bit for you. William had a good question. He kind of touched on it earlier. Is there really any advantage to a live versus a recorded webinar for kind of the sales webinar, especially when you're maybe trying to create a sense of urgency to the decision to buy?
There actually is, and I think that's a really excellent question, because a lot of people have gone to the pre-recorded webinar, and very often they'll just stay on. Here's the thing, and it has to do with the way people are consuming information now. Very often what's happening is people are going to our website, they are doing all their research, they're poking around, and they've already decided, hey, these folks know what they're doing, maybe I'll sit in on their webinar. So when they sit in on the webinar, they want they've already seen the recording. They know that you know your stuff. They want to hear what you're like as a presenter. Maybe they have specific questions that they want answered or things that they're interested in. So that live component is really important. A lot of people like to record their webinars and show recorded webinars because they'll be perfect. And the truth is, people will forgive imperfection. They won't forgive having their time wasted. So I think that live dynamic, especially in a sales situation where people can ask a specific question, where you can ask clarification questions and drive them to the sale, where they create a relationship with the speaker, I think is really important. Doesn't mean there isn't a time and place for the recorded webinars, but you'll find what happens is that the recorded webinars, just the fact that we're recording this webinar means that your presentation probably will have a 50% no-show rate because people know the recording is available. It's okay, but you need to think about what is the advantage of a live presentation. The advantage is that you can answer those questions in real time and you're moving people through the sales cycle. If it's just information they're looking for, the recorded webinar is absolutely fine. Definitely
a helpful answer on the advantages of both in the live one. So Eileen had one, and she said, is there best practices on how many webinars to have a month?
There aren't, unless you're talking about how you're using them. For example, if you're a software company and part of your deal is you want people to experience a demo. I know companies that do them literally one a week. Every Friday at 10 a.m. we have a webinar. And they'll get maybe a couple of people on it, but those are people who are in the middle of sales cycles, who really want a demo and have a lot of questions. So that actually works for them. If you're just doing the Get to Know Us webinar, it's easy to burn people out. I think that once a month is a good number. I've got a client, Communispond, for example, that does a monthly webinar series. They do the same webinar probably twice a year, so they've got 6 webinars in rotation, and they get hundreds of people on there. And that monthly seems to be a good number. So if it's a question of you want people while they're really hot, you need to offer them more often and more consistently. If you're doing it as an awareness or as a series, once a month is probably plenty.
So hopefully that helps. She actually had another question that's good. And you know, we've been talking about the different ways to potentially engage the audience that's on these webinars. Besides polling, what are some suggestions that you have to keep that audience interacting with your presentation?
Yeah, I think it depends on how many people you have. The larger the audience, the less interaction you can have. Polling is one. I am stunned at how many people restrict the chat. For example, I mean, we've had some questions that are off base. We've had some people offer comments and support for what we're talking about. They're asking their own questions. I love the chat. I think that opening chat and encouraging people to use it is a great way of engaging people. I think if you've got a small group, things like if I'm showing how easy a piece of software is to use, there's nothing more effective than actually turning control of that over to an audience member and letting them fill in the information themselves. And being a good presenter is really, really critical. Once you learn the tool, whichever tool you use, you need to get comfortable to the point of conscious competence, where you're not thinking about it so much and you can concentrate on presenting, because then all your higher level communication skills come out. You know to pause, you know to stop, you know to ask questions, you know to respond to somebody's chat. Those are all the kinds of skills that we've developed live over years, but because we're working through technology, our brains fight against our using it. So the most engaging thing you can have is a really good, focused, highly functional presenter.
Great advice for sure. We've got lots of questions coming in, so we'll try to get through as many as we can in the next 5 to 6 minutes here. So if we do miss your question or didn't quite get an answer like you wanted to, we will pass all the information along to Wayne that he can reach out to you and help you with some of those other questions. So Jason had a question, and he said, what do you think about the possibility of generating webinars? Excuse me, let me rephrase this. Do you think the possibility of generating revenue from webinars will increase or decrease in the future?
I think it'll increase for a couple of reasons. One is people are getting more and more used to the technology. I think also we've learned what makes them effective. A year ago, the idea of charging for a webinar would be somewhat iffy because people weren't sure what the quality would be. But I think as we're learning what makes effective online presenters and facilitators, is people are understanding what the tools can do and then applying that to good learning and good presentation technique, the quality is getting better. The technology is getting better. The recording is getting easier. There's just so many ways now between the audience getting more used to and accepting of it and the people using the tools getting better and using it more effectively. Now it has sufficient value. I think that there's always going to be the argument of, you know, is a live class worth more than an online class and you know, those types of things. But I think if we focus on the value of what's being learned or transmitted, that has value and people will pay for it if it's worthwhile.
Great, thank you for that one. Dave says, what stats have you seen on registration versus attendance? So he kind of gave an example and said we used to average about 56% attendance, and then they've recently added the message that they can still register even if they're not going to attend, and that they're going to send them the recording link, and they kind of saw a dip in the attendance down to about 35%. Then they saw an increase in the recording views, obviously, because it's available later on demand. So kind of some suggestions or ideas about that?
I think that there's a couple of things. And Moo, I know that Moo Fish has their hand up, and we can't really respond. So I think if you get your question in chat, that will help. About the no-show rates. Free webinars have a 50% no-show rate. They just do. You know what? So do free live events. People register, but stuff comes up. They haven't paid for it. The one advantage to a webinar over a live event, besides the fact that they're cheaper in the first place, is the ability to record. And that's important. I really want people to pay attention to this. When you do the recording, and we have this in the book, a template for this, but if people took the time to register, they're interested. There's all kinds of reasons why they didn't show up. Don't take it personally. Make sure that you immediately reach out to those people and say, hey, we know you were interested. Here's the recording. Here's when we're going to do the event again. They took the time to register. They're in your orbit. Make sure that you're engaging with them. Interesting stats. One is that if you record it properly and make it easily available, somewhere between 4 and 5 times more people will view the recording than ever viewed the live event. Think about why that is. First of all, if you have a 50% no-show rate, that means 50% of the audience could well come back and view the recording. Plus, people who saw the recording and wanted to see it again, or people who said, hey, you got to see this, let me share with you the link. Plus, everybody who comes to your website from the moment that recording is up there on has the opportunity to see it. So if you're getting decent website traffic, there are a lot of people who never knew that the original event existed, but were able to see the recording. So there's an afterlife with recording. And as you're putting presentations together, you need to think about what is the shelf life of this webinar and how are we going to use this. Is it just going to be available? Are we going to cut it up and put it in short pieces and put it on YouTube? What are we going to do?
So we have time for maybe 2 more questions here. One from Maurice, and he asked, what do you think of Videocast? Is this preeminent or going somewhere, not going anywhere?
Video, here's the deal on video. It adds value in very specific occasions. First of all, most people still do not have the bandwidth or the computer ability to really process video in a way that makes sense. So if you're showing video clips, for example, it might look great on your computer, but looks horrible on everybody else's. Webcams are still choppy and kind of funky. It's getting better all the time. For a lot of webinars for my clients, for example, I often have them use their webcam just to say hello. Hi, I'm Wayne. How are you? Nice to see you. This is the face with the name. And then when we get into the content, we turn the video off because it's not adding any value. Most people can't work comfortably with a webcam. Their eyes are in the wrong place, the lighting is bad, and it's a distraction to both the presenter and the distraction to both the presenter and the audience from the main content. And, oh, by the way, it could crash their computer. So you need to think about, where does video add value? How do we do it in a way that isn't going to be disruptive to our main message? And then find a way. Now, a year from now, if we're having this discussion, I'll bet you my attitude will be different. But for the moment, I think that video is one of those things that everybody thinks will add immense value. And right now, it's very selective where it adds value and where it doesn't.
Great. Well, thank you for taking all the time to answer the questions that did really flood in at the very end. So I'm glad that everybody must have been listening very intently and saving them towards the end. So again, we apologize if we didn't get to quite everything, but we do want to be respectful of your time and everybody else on the call. And again, any questions that went unanswered, we'll be sure to pass those along to Wayne if you'd like to follow up additionally. So thank you guys, everybody, for taking some time out of your afternoon to jump on the call with us. I know there's a ton of questions on the technology side of the webinar piece, and some of those that are a little bit more in-depth answer. Again, maybe something that Wayne can reach out again to answer those. If you guys have any questions specific to ReadyTalk and our platform, obviously we'd be more than happy to help answer some of those questions too. So on that note, I am going to ask Wayne if you have any closing comments.
You know, my only comment is I really hope that folks take the time to look at their webinar strategy, ask themselves the hard questions, and really treat it as the valuable tool that it is. Obviously, if they're interested in my help or the book, I'm happy to help. But really today was about just helping you ask the right questions for you and your company.
Great. Well, again, thank you, Wayne, for taking some time out of your day to share some expertise in us. Again, if you guys have any questions for Wayne, here is his contact information. If you have any questions specifically for ReadyTalk, just chat yes into the chat feature. And the last thing I will say before we jump off the call, we would love to get your feedback on the event. What did you appreciate? What did you wish we would have skipped over? What else would you like to learn from our series? Because we're always trying to help build it, and like Wayne said, bring some thought leadership to people for free. So I'm going to close out the meeting, and post-event survey will pop up. If you would just take a couple seconds to fill that out and submit it, we would absolutely love to get your feedback. So on that note, I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon, and we hope that you join us again in the ReadyTalk webinar series. Have a great day.